Hello, Scrappy friends, and welcome back. Well, we are finally here doing our next intermediate go-to design. I'm going to refer you back once again to the first video that we did in this series. I will have it linked at the end of this video. But I feel like you should, if you haven't seen the first one, where it was more of go-to designs for beginners and it had very basic design cuts that you can do if you're a beginner. During that video, I asked if anybody would be interested in the intermediate level, and it was overwhelmingly a yes. So here we are. I have decided since that first video to break these all up into smaller videos so that you have an easy reference point, and I have them all listed in a playlist called Go-To Designs. Today we're continuing on with the band go-to design, and this I feel is one of the easiest go-to designs that we are talking about. But of course I probably said that about all of them because that's the idea, right? That they're all super easy to do and turn out very beautiful pages. This is where we left off with the band the last time. So the band is this piece right here. It's a big chunk where we're going to use that to house our photos. But we still have room to do some pretty decorating. We have a punch out. On this one, we put it at the top and the bottom. You can change it up by doing either one or both of those areas. And then I came back in and topped it off with a little strip of pattern paper from the same collection, so it looks like it's very cohesive and belongs together. Also, I just want to recap when it comes to the band design that I feel like this is one of those perfect designs that you just carry on to the second page. I would just do what we call is a mirror image and do the exact same thing on the other side. I will show you with a couple 2-page layouts today just so we can get the full idea. But here's our one page. The thing about the band that you have to keep in mind, this is a pretty big band. This is a 10 by 12. And if I'm going to carry that on to the second page, then I'm going to need 2 pieces of this. Not a problem, I think, because it's still worth it to use 2 pieces to get 2 pages done because it has a lot of room for our photos and our decorations. I'm going to have 5 different techniques for you today. The way that I would now take my band layout and elevate it up to more of an intermediate level design. I'm going to start right here with this first one and use it as an example. I like to give each of my 5 tips a different name just so we could put it into our memory bank and kind of helps us to remember what it was and how to accomplish it once we leave the video and get to the actual creating. So the first example that I want to talk about is we're taking our band and we're going to fill it in. Okay, so what does that mean? It means we're going to take the open areas around our band and bring in some more pattern paper. And yes, I would use pattern paper on this. I want to fill it in. So I'm going to add a piece up here, a piece down here, and then I'll bring my punch back in and the strip. It looks like that. That's all filled in. The cardstock behind is completely covered up. We call that wallpapering. You could either weld these two together or you could do what we call wallpapering and cover the whole white cardstock. Or for something like this, I would like to use the index sheets that come with our pattern paper. But something that I'm not going to care is going to get covered up. So this is the fill it in method, and it's where we're kind of filling in all the areas around the band. We're going to see more of this later. Now I'm going to take this fill it in concept and I'm going to elevate it up. So let me bring in some photos, 3 vertical photos going straight across. And yes, I would just continue that on to the second page, but you have so much variation. You can stagger them, you can turn them this way. You could really get a lot of photos. In fact, you could even turn it this way and bring in another photo. You see how much room you have. Now again, this is a 10 by 12 block, so we do have a lot of room to put our photos. And I'm saving this spot down here because I'm probably going to want to add a journaling box, maybe a title, and some cute little embellishments. But let's take this one out for now, slide these back down, because here's my page. We could stop right there, or we can elevate it up. So let's elevate it up. First thing I would do is I like to bring in photo mats. So I have this paper, and I just want to make a disclaimer real quick. I'm trying to use scraps for these designs today, so they might not always match or might not always come from the same collection, so forgive me. So I've cut this photo mat down to a 6 by 11 inch piece. Now you're going to see that come up a couple times today because I like this cut. 6 by 11 houses my photos just perfectly. I could put three and a half by 5.5 inch photos in this block and still have a little bit of it showing. So whether you use cardstock or pattern paper, it wouldn't really matter, but you can see just a little bit all the way around is showing. I would put this right in the middle if I was doing a 1 page. If I was doing a 2 page, I would scoot it over here to the inseam and let it continue on to the second page. The reason I'm doing that is because our band, we want it to flow. The band looks like it's just flowing right into the next page. So we want to keep that in mind. To elevate that up again, I would bring in some layers of paper. Okay, these are my standard tips each time I elevate a page, whether it's for a go-to design or something else. Photo mats and layering. I would bring in some layers, and maybe I would take this piece, which is about a 2 by 7.5, in case you want to recreate the similar type of layout, and I would tuck it right here. Now it's like coming out a little bit at the top and a little bit out of the bottom. I would just try and make that even. Then I would bring in even more scraps. This is about a 1 by 8, and I would bring it here and tuck it under this. I would probably make these two staggered if I could. It would be okay if it's flushed as well, but I just want that little bit of visual interest that they're not the same height. Bring a second one in down here at the bottom, and again you'll see it staggered just a little bit there. You see how that just changes the whole dynamic of our band. Now, how would I go about adding in my journaling? I love using the lined paper to spot out my journaling because I could really cut this down to whatever size. I probably would put it right down here, tuck it a little bit under this strip right here, and I would bring in a title. Here we have one that says beautiful, and I would probably put it right up here at the top. If I had a 2 page, again, we can spread out some of these elements. Leave my title here, maybe take the journaling box and move it to the other side. Now let's see where I would embellish. Like I'll bring in this green scallop circle to rest my title on, and maybe a half circle right down here. I think I would tuck my journaling box under that half circle, and then I would just bring in some random embellishments to go with the theme of my layout. Again, it's not about the embellishments on these pages, it's about the technique. If I had a second page, I would probably make sure I have at least one more cluster over here on the other side so that I have my 3 clusters and a visual triangle. So that's the first technique. It's called fill it in. We're going to come back to this again in a little bit. I'll clean this up and we'll get on to technique number 2. I like to call this one shrink it down, and we can do that in 2 different ways. We could either go height or width or both. So we started with a 10 by 12 on the previous technique, but we're changing this to an 8 by 11. Now again, I'm going to bring it to the inseam because I want this to flow right with the second page. Okay, if you didn't have a second page, then maybe I would center it. But I'm going to bring mine to the inseam. This time I have an 8-inch width. So I'm going to bring it down 2 inches from the top and up 2 inches from the bottom so that I know that it's centered. So now it's going to give me all this beautiful white space around the outside. Let me go ahead and bring in my photos so you can kind of see from the beginning. I'm going to put 2 horizontals right here and then 1 vertical right there. I'm going to bring in a border punch out. Just like that. Now with the right background, whether I probably wouldn't leave it white, but you certainly could. Look at that. You have a page already going and it doesn't even need anything else. But we're here to level it up today and elevate our layouts, so I'm going to keep going. So one good thing to always keep in mind with the band is to give it a topper and a bottom. You saw that in the first video, and I'm going to do the same thing here and just give it a top and a bottom. So how can I change this up? Well, I could bring in some photo mats. And so I probably would pick this photo right here and just bring in one photo mat on this particular layout. Page 2, maybe I'd bring in another photo mat on another photo. You could also, if you wanted to, bring in a solid photo mat for these. I love doing that. But in this case, I kind of want that pattern paper to shine through. I love that pattern paper and I want to continue seeing it. Let's finish up decorating this one. I would bring in a journaling mat, put it probably somewhere down here. A title, again, would come up here. I bring in a cluster base for my title to go right there, and some elements. Here's a nice die cut. I would come down here on my journaling box and maybe use the snowflake as another embellishment base, maybe a little hat up here. These are all just embellishments from the collection. And one more, I think I'll just add it up here. And again, it's not about the decorating, it's more about the technique. So this is an easy way to change up our band. We're just shrinking it down, leaving a little bit of space around the edges. Yes, I would probably make these equal on the top and bottom just for visual reasons, so it looks nice and linear. I love that look, but there you go. Technique number 2, shrink the band. For technique number 3, I'm going to go ahead and show you on a double page spread because I think this one I would only do on one side of the layout. This technique, I'm going to call it adding something vertical. Adding something vertical is a great and easy way to add extra interest to your page. Let me show you. First thing we're going to do is we're going to shrink the band, but this time I'm only shrinking it by the height and not by the width. I love this cut as well. I took a 1/12" piece of paper and I cut it right in two. Same thing like the 6x11, I'm keeping this one a 6x12, so it goes across the whole thing. Of course, you could always cut off an extra inch and have some white space showing over here. Again, I do this cut because it houses photos super nice. So I have it laid out here, this time 3 inches down from the top, 3 inches up from the bottom, just centered in the middle of the paper. Let's top the top and bottom like we always have been doing. We give it a little bit of a cap at the top, and it gives us a little bit of closure down here at the bottom. We're actually giving ourselves more area within our band, but we're also bringing in that additional pattern paper. But let's bring in some of the techniques that we were just talking about as well. So in this case, I want to do the fill it in method. So I'm going to take my band and fill in the rest of it. So I have about 3 inches to play up here, and you can do something like a 2-inch cut for the top one and a 1 inch for the bottom. Is a really nice cut to remember. That way it fills in everything. My pieces were a little bit different. And that's the great thing, is you can just take your scraps, measure them out, and see what you can do with them. And so mine are about 1 3/4 by 1 1/4. So that equals 3 inches. And I have the same thing at the top and bottom. Let me go ahead and bring in my photos. These are 3x5s. You certainly could go to 3.5x5. We have plenty of room here to do that. And then this, maybe turn the other direction or even go with a smaller photo there. Okay, so we do have room, but I'm going to use a smaller photo here today so that we could see the result. So let's put these two back the way they were. I am going to go ahead and turn this one on its side so that I have some room here for a title. I'm going to try and keep everything in my band, even though I don't have to. I feel like my band is extended now that I added the orange. I would put 2 or 3 photos over here. So I talk a lot about elevating layouts on on my channel. So we talked about adding photo mats, and we also talked about bringing in layers. Another thing is something we've already seen, and that's to bring in some punch outs, something to cover up the seam between the layered papers. Or I would use a border sticker or a laser cut border or something like that. So let me show you an example. Here's some laser cut borders. and I would place it right over the seam. It really helps break that transition between the two papers. You see the difference between this side with the border and this side without the border. Let's add another one like that. And I kind of want to do the same thing down here. Now I'm not going to do every single section because that would be a little overwhelming. So I'm going to pick these two at the bottom, and I'm going to add, this one is a punch out. So this one's getting a little full and a little bit louder because I have a lot more pattern paper and colors going on this layout. But I would do the same thing over here. To bring in a vertical element, I would do something like this. This is a 4 by 12 inch strip. And I'm going to take this photo out and slide my strip underneath my border, run it to the tippy top, and then slide this over the top. And that's adding something vertical. We can bring our photo back in, and you see how that just kind of adds a lot of interest to the page. Okay, so an easy 4 by 12 inch strip is wonderful. It's another great cut, because we know that a nice size photo will fit here. This is a 3 by 5, but we can also put a 3.5 inch photo here, and it would look equally nice, and the pattern paper would still show around. Let's go ahead and try a different cut though, because y'all know my banner cut is one of my go-to design elements. So I want to change this out really quickly. Now I used the same 4 inch wide by 12 inches, and I just gave it a little banner cut there. Adds even more interest to our page. Bring back in the photo. If you wanted to get in some smaller photos, you certainly could. These are really small, 3 by 3 inch squares, but they fit really nice on there too. Now I have 2 photos there instead of 1. So I like this layout right here. The way the photos are, I have this one going horizontally, a few vertical, and then a few that I can cut down. How would I finish this page off? I definitely will bring in a title. So I have this nice big one. It says Fun in the Sun. And I probably bring in a little embellishment base for that. Let me tuck that right in under that. I'm going to put one right down over here, probably next to where all my papers are meeting right there, overlapping into the border just a little bit. And then I probably would come right up here, maybe tuck it in under the clouds there a little bit. There we go. I'll bring in some elements just to show you how I would decorate. I like the circular elements, so I'll continue with that idea. Little piece right there. Down here, one of these slide rails. I like this bike, so it would go right there. And I'm gonna bring in a little pop with a flower because that's kind of the theme of my paper. I would come up here, just try to bring in some colors that would kind of match. Feel like leaves might be a good idea here because we have leaves in our paper. Another flower element right there, and then maybe a little arrow telling us which direction to go. Just some ideas with some embellishing, but there we go. That is adding something vertical to your band layout. So I'm going to clean this up and we'll be back with technique number 4. And while I do that, I'd like to take this opportunity to ask you that if you love these Go-To Design episodes, then please let me know by clicking the like button and sharing the love. That helps me to spread my content through YouTube. Also keeps me very motivated to continue with this series. I have one more in the series to do, which would be the edge. But now I'm also learning that I have a couple other go-to designs that I'd like to share as well. So keep me motivated, click that like button. Thank you. For technique number 4, just like we did with the vertical, well, we can't leave horizontal out. So we're gonna go ahead and this one's going to be called Add Something Horizontal. So the same concept as the vertical, it's going to add a lot of interest to your page, and it's very easy to do. And again, we're going to mix together some of our other concepts that we've already used. I already have shrunk the band down to our 6 by 12, just like the previous layout. Again, I love this cut because I get to use my full piece of pattern paper and spread it across 2-page layout. I don't need to trim it. It fits perfectly. In this way, I use the whole piece. I have no scraps and no waste. So I've already established my band, which is shrunk down. I gave it a little cap at the top and the bottom just to get us going back on our flow. And you'll see that I'm not afraid to put my icon paper here in the middle of the band. I feel like this is a pretty loud piece of paper. It's a lot going on. I love it. I want it to be on my page. But having it as the middle of the band, I'm also going to be able to have control over kind of toning it down and only having little pops of it popping through the layout. So this is a beautiful layout. Let me go ahead and put my photos on. So you already are getting the idea that this can hold an arrangement of different kinds of photos. I think you first have to start with your photos and decide how you want to display them on the page. I'm going to just go pretty easy here. I'm going to use a 6x4 right here on both sides, and I'm going to bring in 2 little 4x4s off to the side. And this alone would make a great beginner page, but that's not why we're here today. We're here to elevate this up. So let's go ahead and do that. First thing I would do is bring in some photo mats. Photo mats really help to bring out the detail in your photos. Okay, so let's get to that horizontal piece because it's bringing in layers that I'm going to create my horizontal piece across the layout. Now I'm going to bring in 2 pieces. Excuse my little patchwork here. I was using scraps. So I loved this orange piece, so I thought it's going to be beautiful tucked in underneath the photos. So I'm going to put a big chunk here on one side. This is a 7x8. And then on the other side, I have a 5x8. So the height is the same at 8 inches, and I just have different widths. So you can see the horizontal piece now going across the page like that. Let's continue elevating it. So we have our photo mats on, we have some layers building up. And what are the other things that we would do? I would bring in a punch. And so I punched out 2 rows with a border making cartridge, and I just trimmed it down to match the width of this here is 12 inches. So I have 7 on one side and 5 on the other, which gives me 1 whole punch out, and I just cut it where I needed to. And so to continue that, I'll bring in little strips of paper to cover up the edges, that transition between the punch and the paper. And you certainly don't have to do this part. I feel it just gives it that extra elevated look. There you go. Now you can really see that horizontal element and how it just elevates that band look up. We still have our band behind. I love this look best of all. Okay, let's bring in our journaling box and some beautiful elements to go with it. So I'm just going to add this journaling box from my stash and put it right down here. There's lots of places on here where you can journal. You can just write on to the cardstock down here. If you wanted to, over here, there's just a lot of areas. I feel like there's also more room to add in more photos here if you wanted to as well. Lots of room over here. I can add a title. Let's scoot my photos in a little closer. And I probably would do something like this. Add a little banner. My title, maybe something like that. Maybe a little palm tree coming out the top, and then maybe a little shell element. Again, we're not supposed to be decorating. So let me just continue. I would then bring in a cluster area right over here, and then maybe add a few more pieces, kind of fill in a little bit of that open area. Another palm tree. There we go. Down here, I love to embellish over my journaling spot, and here we have a lot of open space as well, so maybe I'll just bring in a few more elements here. There we go. I don't want to get carried away with the embellishing because you know that I could, but this just gives you an idea of how we can use this horizontal feature and then add some great embellishment clusters. And I still have 4 photos on here. I feel like there is room for others. This one could even be turned into a full 4x6. There's plenty of room there as well. Same with this one here. Okay, so that's technique number 4. Let me clean up, stay tuned, and we'll finish this up with number 5. before I finish up with technique number 5, I really would love to know if you would please comment which of the techniques that we talked about today is your favorite. Do you like to fill it in, shrink it, a combination of both, adding the vertical technique, the horizontal technique, or number 5, which is going to be called break up the band? Okay, so let me know. I really would like to know. I like all of them, and I just love using the band go-to design. So adding these extra little pops kind of help us to keep us creative and keep us going, right? So number 5 is called break up the band, and I'm going to actually flip that paper over and have my icon paper facing up. And so that I think this will give us a more visual idea of what this one is. So I'm starting this time with a 9 by 12. So I have shrunk it down a little bit, and it still gives me lots of area to play with. So what do I mean by break up the band? Well, I'm going to take this paper and cut it into sections, and I'll be right back. Okay, so now I've trimmed it into 3 pieces. I trimmed off a little bit of each one, so they are now 2 by 3/4. So I took off a 1/4 inch basically. If you took the 9, divided it by 3, you'd have 3 inches, and then I took off just a little sliver. I'm going to bring it down the same. I had that first chunk at 1.5 inches, and I'm going to bring the first one here and the bottom one here to 1.5, and then center in that way. So now I have my band, but it's broken up, and I'm just evenly spacing it out. You can have as much white showing in between, or whatever color your cardstock is behind there. And you can have it a little bit thicker if you like, or you can push it up and have just a really thin piece like that. Okay, I'm going to give it a little more space there so we can see it. With 3 strips, you can do it. You have scraps. You certainly could bring in just multiple colors back there. Would look so gorgeous. I would recommend that one for sure. And then how would I put my photos on here? Well, I would bring in the 6 by 11 mat again, because if I put this right over the 3 opened pieces now, I feel like that kind of just ties everything in together. Let me bring in my photos, and again, they look so great on that 6 by 11 photo mat. Then down here, I probably would bring in a little spot for my journaling. I just picked some colors that matched, and I will cover that up and have just a little exposed. Put my lined paper there again, bring in a little title. I would put it here. It would also look good up there with an embellishment cluster base, but let's just assume we're going to put everything down here. Bring in a little bit of embellishing, and there we go. That is breaking up the band. But what if we wanted to elevate this even further? Let's take off our photos for a minute, because what I would want to do is bring in some layers behind my photos. So let's say we have a couple of choices. These are 1/4 inch strips. I can place one at the top and one at the bottom, and I'll bring back in a different color photo mat now because I used those colors there, and I would just bring it in like this. There we go. And it just kind of gives us a cap at the top and the bottom. But another way we can make that elevated up is if we just moved our strips down and put a little color between the breakage points of our band. Okay, now this was just the reverse side of my paper, which was even better because then I don't have that little bit of waste that I trimmed off. And now you can really see the band look. We've still broken it up. We've just added in a little bit more color there. So let's get this all lined up and pushed up, and there we go. Yep, that's my favorite. I feel like when you break up the band to make it a little bit more eye-pleasing is why I have all the photos over here in one chunk. Maybe on the other side, I would move it to the other side of the layout, and then here in the center, we still have room for a smaller photo if we want, or we could bring up our journaling spot, play around with a little bit of the title placement or the embellishment clusters. We have lots of room on here to even add our own ideas. Well, there we go. That is number 5, and that concludes our intermediate go-to design using the band layout. One of my personal favorites. I hope that you guys are now seeing some of these go-to designs popping up in sketches here and there or other ideas, because I did not make these up. These are just things that I've noticed are very consistent in the scrapbooking world. I will be back with another episode when we conclude our intermediate level with the edge design, and then I will have to work on the other go-to designs that are brewing in my mind and make another whole video on those. But until then, take care everybody, and I'll see you real soon. Bye.